Imagine a sound so loud that it doesn't just, hurt your ears, it physically ruptures them.
Mm.
And I don't mean if you're standing right next to it. I'm talking about being 40 miles away.
It sounds impossible. I mean, the physics shouldn't even work that way.
Right. And this wasn't just some local event. The sound was so intense it traveled around the world, not once, 7 times.
Yeah.
Today, we are dialing the clock back to a very specific Monday morning, August 27th, 1883.
The height of the Victorian era.
Exactly. So maybe set the scene for me. What does the world look like on that morning?
It's a really unique moment in history. You've got the Industrial Revolution going full swing.
Yeah.
You have these huge steamships crossing the oceans, replacing the old sailing ships.
Okay.
And maybe most importantly, you have telegraph cables. These threads being laid across the ocean floors.
So the world is starting to feel smaller.
Much smaller.
Yeah.
Information could suddenly travel faster than, well, ever before. And it's right at this intersection where modern human consciousness, this ability to share news globally, almost in real time, it collides with just a raw, primordial force of nature.
And that force was the eruption of Krakatoa. It was in the Dutch East Indies, which of course we know today as Indonesia.
That's the one.
But we're not just here to talk about a volcano exploding, are we?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, if we just list the geological stats, we miss the entire point. The whole mission of this deep dive is to understand how Krakatoa became the first truly global disaster.
Okay.
It's the moment humanity kind of collectively realized that, we're all sitting on the same rock, breathing the same air.
It honestly sounds like the plot of a disaster movie, but this really happened. So let's get into it. I've got my notes, but walk me through the timeline. August 27th, 10:02 a.m. What goes down?
Well, the volcano had been grumbling for months. Smoke, ash, some seismic activity. It was actually a tourist attraction.
Really? People were going to see it?
Yeah, taking day trips. But at 10:02 a.m., the main event hits. The paroxysm.
Paroxysm. That is a terrifying word.
And it fits. This was the third explosion of the morning, and it was the one that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
It obliterated 2/3 of the island. Instantly.
2/3?
Gone. We're talking about 25 cubic kilometers of rock and ash just blasted into the atmosphere.
I can't even picture what 25 cubic kilometers of rock looks like.
Well, think of it in terms of energy. The release is estimated at around 200 megatons of TNT.
Okay, I know that's a lot, but give me a comparison. How does that stack up against, say, modern weapons?
To put it in a pretty grim perspective, it's roughly 13,000 times the yield of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima.
13,000 times.
Yes, in one single burst.
That is, I can't even wrap my head around that. And that energy release created what you mentioned earlier, the loudest sound in modern history.
The loudest sound ever recorded, yeah. It just defies acoustic comprehension at 100 miles away. So, imagine the distance between Philadelphia and New York City.
Got it.
The sound registered at 172 decibels.
Okay, let's put that in context. I know a jet engine taking off right next to your head is, what, 140 decibels?
Around there, yes. And the human threshold for actual pain is about 130. So at 100 miles away, this sound wasn't just loud, it was way, way above the threshold of physical pain.
That is just horrific. I was reading the log of this ship, the RMS Norm Castle. They were about 40 miles from the island, and the entry is, it's chilling.
But one of the most famous accounts we have.
The captain wrote, and get this, so violent are the explosions that the eardrums of over half my crew have been shattered.
Wow.
And he ends with, my last thoughts are with my dear wife. I am convinced that the day of judgment has come.
He literally thought the world was ending. And for them, in that moment, it effectively was. I mean, the pressure wave at that distance was physically beating them.
Unbelievable.
But the thing that really emphasizes the scale of the sound is how far it traveled.
Right. I saw a note that it was heard on Rodriguez Island. Where is that?
It's in the Indian Ocean near Mauritius. That is 3,000 miles away from Krakatoa.
3,000 miles. That's roughly the distance between New York and San Francisco.
Exactly. Imagine standing in Times Square and hearing a noise that originated at the Golden Gate Bridge. And not a whisper either. The people on Rodriguez Island described it as sounding like heavy artillery.
They thought they were under attack.
They thought a naval battle was happening just over the horizon. The police commander actually sent out a detachment to investigate. They were sure a ship was in distress, firing its cannons.
And it was heard in Australia, too.
In Perth, yeah. Just a staggering display of physics.
So if you're 3,000 miles away, you're confused. If you're 40 miles away, you're deafened. But what about the people who were closer? on the coasts of Sumatra and Java.
That's where the story shifts from, acoustic physics to just an absolute nightmare. That's when you get the deadly cargo of the eruption, the pyroclastic flows.
Now, I've always assumed that if you're on an island, the ocean is your safety net, you know? If a volcano blows the lava or the gas, it hits the water and just stops, like a natural fire break.
You would think so. That's the conventional wisdom. Yeah. But Krakatoa, it basically rewrote the geology textbooks that day.
How?
It's terrifying physics. The pyroclastic flows, these avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock, they were so massive and moving so fast, we're talking 80 kilometers an hour.
80?
That they didn't sink when they hit the coastline.
They didn't sink? What do you mean?
They were so hot that they boiled the surface of the ocean.
Yeah.
Instantly. On contact.
They boiled the sea.
Instantly. And that created a cushion of steam. The flow literally hovered on top of the water, racing across the Sunda Strait with almost no friction.
Like a hovercraft.
Exactly. A hovercraft made of superheated ash and death. It traveled 40 kilometers over the open ocean.
Oh my.
So the people standing on the coast of Sumatra, looking across the strait, thinking they were safe behind this, moat of water, they suddenly saw a wall of fire rushing across the waves at them.
That is the stuff of nightmares. There was literally nowhere to run.
Nowhere. This one phenomenon wiped out the entire population of Sabisi Island. That's about 3,000 people buried under ash. And in Sumatra, people were burned by hot ashes carried across the strait.
So it sounds like the fire was the main killer then.
Actually, no. And despite that horror, the fire wasn't the biggest killer. It was the water. The tsunamis took the most lives by far.
Because the whole island basically collapsed into the sea.
Right. When the volcano emptied its magma chamber, it collapsed in on itself, creating what's called a submarine caldera. It sucked the ocean in and then just expelled it with massive force.
And these waves, how big are we talking?
They reached heights of 41 meters.
41 meters, that's what, 135 feet? That's a 12-story building made of water?
And it just scoured the coast, wiped out 165 villages completely. The official death toll was 36,417, but a lot of modern historians think it was probably over 100,000.
Because of unregistered populations?
Exactly.
There's that story about a ship, the Baru, that really stuck with me. It just illustrates the sheer power of that water.
The Baru, yeah. A Dutch steamship. It was anchored in the harbor. The wave didn't just sink it. It picked the entire ship up.
And carried it inland.
Nearly 3 kilometers inland.
Yeah.
And it just dropped it in a jungle valley, 30 meters above sea level. Can you imagine walking through a dense jungle and you just stumble upon a massive iron steamship sitting among the trees?
It's completely surreal. But not every ship was lost, right? There was that one captain.
Lindemann.
Captain Johan Lindemann of the Gouverneur-General Lauten. This is just an incredible piece of seamanship and, honestly, psychological grit. He saw the wave coming.
So what do? You turn and run. Well, if he turned the ship to run, the wave would have hit the stern and capsized them instantly. He knew that. So he did the only thing he could. He turned the wheel and steered the ship head-on into the wall of water.
Into the wave. Under the volcano.
Directly into it. Under the shadow of the erupting mountain, ash raining down, in total pitch blackness at 10 a.m. He drove the ship up the face of this wave. They made it over the crest and rode it out.
I can't imagine the tension on that bridge, just staring death in the face and steering right at it.
It's unimaginable. They survived, but for the coastal villages, there was no escape. Just total devastation.
So we have sound, we have the fire, the water, local devastation on just a massive scale. But you mentioned at the start this was a global event. How does a volcano in Indonesia affect someone in, say, London?
And this is where we move from the visible chaos to the invisible impact. The explosion was so powerful it created a pressure wave, what they called a great air wave.
I've heard it described as the atmosphere ringing like a bell. What does that actually mean?
Think of the atmosphere like a fluid, or like the surface of a pond. Krakatoa is a giant boulder being thrown into that pond.
Yep.
It sent this ripple of high pressure racing outward in all directions.
But airwaves usually dissipate pretty fast, don't they? I mean, a clap of thunder doesn't travel forever.
Usually, yes. But this was different. This wave had so much energy behind it that it didn't just dissipate. It circled the entire globe.
Now, we know this because of instruments.
Exactly. By 1883, we had barometers instruments that measure air pressure in major cities like London, Berlin, Washington, D.C. And scientists watched the needles on these machines just jump.
Abruptly.
So they saw a spike. But then, about 34 hours later, the needle jumped again.
The wave came back.
It came back. It had gone all the way around the world and hit them from the other side. And then 34 hours after that, it spiked again.
It just kept going.
It circled the Earth at least 7 times, 3 to 4 times in each direction. It was the first time humanity actually validated this theory, that the atmosphere is a single, continuous fluid wrapped around the planet. The Royal Society in London went crazy for this data.
So the scientists are watching their needles jump, but for the average person, looking up at the sky, did they see anything?
Oh, they saw plenty. They just had no idea what they were looking at. And this brings us to a fascinating little mystery involving the wind.
The trade winds.
Right. At the time, we knew about trade winds on the surface. But people started noticing dust and these strange optical effects appearing in places like East Africa and Panama way faster than those surface winds could carry them.
So the dust was moving faster than the wind should allow.
Exactly. And entered the detective of our story, Sereno Edwards Bishop.
I love that we have a detective. Who was he?
He was a reverend and an amateur scientist living in Honolulu. He started seeing these hazy skies and these brilliant sunsets in Hawaii shortly after the eruption. He knew the eruption happened on August 27th.
And when did the dust get to Hawaii?
About 10 days later. So Bishop just did the math. He looked at the distance from Indonesia to Hawaii, and he looked at the time. He calculated that for the dust to get there that fast, there had to be a wind current moving it over 70 miles per hour.
But surface winds don't move that fast steadily, do they?
No, certainly not the trade winds. He realized this wind had to be way up, high in the upper atmosphere. He even coined a term for it. The smoke stream.
The smoke stream. That sounds familiar.
It should. It was the first empirical evidence of what we now call the jet stream.
Wait, so we discovered the jet stream because of a volcano?
Essentially, yes. Before Krakatoa, we had no idea these stratospheric easterlies even existed. The volcano acted like a tracer die. It just injected millions of tons of dust into the current so we could finally see it moving.
That is incredible. So the scientists are finding wind currents, the barometers are spiking, but regular people are just seeing the sky change. I've read about the blue moons.
Yeah, the visual impact was profound. The eruption shot about 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, and this created a global aerosol veil. The particles were a very specific size, about 0.7 microns.
And why does that size matter?
It's physics again. That specific size is perfect for scattering red light, but it lets blue and green light pass right through. So for weeks, people all over the world would look up at night and see the moon as like an azure blue or an emerald green.
A literal once-in-a-blue-moon event.
Caused by a volcano. But the sunsets were the main event. They turned this blood red, crimson, and purple. And they stayed that way long after the sun went down.
I read an anecdote about the New York Fire Department. Is that true?
It is. In New York and also Poughkeepsie and New Haven, fire brigades were actually called out.
They thought there was a fire.
The red glare on the horizon was so intense that people thought a neighboring city was burning to the ground. They rushed the fire engines out, horses galloping and everything, only to realize it was just the sun setting through volcanic dust.
That's wild. But it wasn't just confusion, right? There was a real sense of anxiety. The world just looked wrong.
It looked apocalyptic, and this really bled into the culture. You know, the famous painting The Scream by Edvard Munch.
Of course. The guy holding his face, looking terrified, and the background is all swirly orange and red.
Exactly. Munch painted it a decade later, in 1893, but his diary entry describing the inspiration, it dates right back to this period. He wrote about walking with friends when the sky suddenly turned blood red. He said he felt a great, unending scream piercing through nature.
Wow. So that painting isn't just some abstract art. It's a literal depiction of a volcanic sky.
It's a snapshot of the psychological toll. I mean, you have to remember, people didn't immediately know, oh, that's just dust from Indonesia. For many, especially in religious communities, this looked like the end times.
The end of the world panic.
Precisely. And this triggered a real clash between the emerging scientific press and the traditional religious pulpits. You had newspapers trying to explain the dust theory, and right next to them you had sermons preaching the apocalypse.
I have a quote here from a Reverend T. DeWitt Talmage. He was a big deal in America at the time.
He was, yeah. What did he say?
He used the volcano as this metaphor for divine accounting. He preached, God will not let you off. He was basically saying the red skies were a sign of judgment.
So you have the split screen. Science is saying it's stratospheric particulates, and religion is saying it's the wrath of God. And in a way, both were just trying to make sense of a global trauma. This event forced people to look up and realize they were part of a planetary system that was so much bigger than their local village.
Speaking of planetary systems, let's look at the physical aftermath. You dump that much ash into the sky, it's got to affect the weather.
Oh, it did. We entered what's called a volcanic winter. The global temperature dropped by about 0.6 degrees Celsius.
That doesn't sound like that much, half a degree.
In climate terms, it's huge. It disrupted weather patterns for years. In Europe and the U.S., they called them the years without summer. There were crop failures, unseasonal frosts. It devastated farmers.
But I read somewhere that it wasn't bad for everyone.
And this is where climate gets really complicated. While the U.S. and Europe were freezing, the Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal, they actually benefited.
How does that work?
That region is usually pretty arid, but the shift in atmospheric circulation brought them rain. They called it the blessing. It improved their crop yields while destroying them everywhere else. It just highlights how these climate events create winners and losers.
Chaos for some, a blessing for others. And speaking of the response, we saw something new happen in the aftermath, right? The Krakatoa committees.
Yes, this was arguably one of the first international disaster relief efforts, and it was facilitated by global communications. Because of the telegraph, people in Amsterdam and London knew about the suffering in Java almost immediately.
So they sent help.
They did.
Huh.
The Dutch colonial government set up these committees. They held fundraisers, like the Krakatoa Fancy Fair in Amsterdam. It was really the beginning of that modern global empathy, where you send money to a disaster halfway across the world.
I'm sensing a but here.
Well, you have to look at it through the lens of the time. This was a colonial administration. And while there was genuine charity, a lot of the relief was focused on restoring order and economic productivity for the Dutch Empire, not purely for the well-being of the indigenous population.
Right, getting the plantation workers back to work.
Exactly. It's a very nuanced legacy.
And while the humans were dealing with all the politics of recovery, nature was doing its own reboot. The island of Krakatoa itself was basically sterilized, right? Wiped clean.
Completely. Tabula rasa. A blank slate. Everything died. For biologists, this was actually a grim opportunity. It became the perfect laboratory to see how life returns to a completely dead land.
So what was the first thing to come back?
You might guess birds, or maybe seeds floating over, but no. It was a tiny, microscopic spider.
Of course it was a spider.
Caught on the wind. It arrived within just a few months. Then came lizards rafting on debris, then ferns. It just showed how incredibly resilient tropical ecosystems are. Life wants to return.
But the story isn't over, is it? The volcano didn't just die.
No. The beast was just sleeping. In 1927, fishermen started noticing bubbles and steam in the water, and then a new island broke the surface, right in the center of the old cold era. They named it Anek Krakatoa.
Which translates to...
Child of Krakatoa.
And it's still there.
It's still there, and it is very, very much active. In fact, in 2018, a landslide from Anek Krakatoa caused another deadly tsunami. It's a pretty stark reminder that this geological story is still being written. We haven't conquered these forces, we just live around them.
So let's bring this all together. We've got the loudest sound in history, the discovery of the jet stream, we have art, panic, relief efforts. Why does Krakatoa still matter to us today? Why are we talking about 1883 and 2026?
I think Krakatoa was a threshold moment for our species. Before 1883, a disaster was local. If a volcano blew up in Java, it stayed in Java. Maybe you'd hear a rumor about it a year later. But Krakatoa proved that we don't live in isolation.
It forced that global village perspective on us, whether we wanted it or not.
Exactly. It demonstrated, in the most violent way possible, that we share a single, fragile atmosphere. What happens in the Sunda Strait colors the skies of New York. The dust that falls on a farmer in Java eventually affects the harvest in England. It was just this brutal, loud lesson in planetary connectedness.
And one that feels pretty relevant right now.
More than ever. We're obviously more connected now than they were then, but the fundamental lesson holds true. We're all downwind of each other.
Well, that is a lot to think about next time you see a particularly vivid sunset. That brings us to the end of this deep dive into the day the world held its breath.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.